Thank you. Can you guys hear me? All right. As Saul said, my name is NT. Please don't call me ET. I get that a lot. I will go home. One of the things that you should know about me is that I live in New York. And New York, as you may or may not know, is one of the dating capitals of the world, right? And I've been known to go on a couple dates here or there. So inevitably what happens very quickly in New York is that people ask you, well, what do you do? You know, and I say, well, this is the moment, right? This is where you get to impress the person. You say, oh, I do educational video games. And you guys know Oregon Trail? Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Math Blaster? Number Munchers? All right. So I'm expecting, all right, there's going to be some real interest here. I say, what I do is I do the 2.0 version of that. We create multiplayer educational video games that look and feel like Halo, minus the violence, right? But where kids can get in, they can play against each other, whether it's in Korea, Nigeria, the Bahamas, New York, and they can teach each other and collaborate and compete in math, literacy, science, history. And I sit back and I wait for the adoration that I expect, right? And inevitably, I always get the same response. Why? Urkel. So I'm like, all right. Obviously, I'm dating the wrong people. So I'm glad to be here at this audience that understands innovation, and I'm actually going to take a step back and explain why I believe that this actually helps to solve one of the biggest problems that we have in education. But in order to understand that, first you have to understand a little bit about me. First, I am a nerd and a self-described brat. That was me when I was first born. It explains a lot about how I am now that I had, knee-high socks and green. I think the green and white, I'm actually from Nigeria and the Bahamas. Those are the flags of Nigeria, the colors of Nigeria. Then I became a teenage gamer and programmer. At the age of 11 years old in Nigeria, I knew 6 programming languages. I was programming video games and very basic stuff. Ended up then moving on to become a computer engineer. Came to the United States, said, all right, let's go learn how to make these computers, VLSI design and all the rest of that sort of thing. And then after I graduated, I actually became a math tutor in Big Brothers Big Sisters. This is what actually led to the experience to start the company that I'm not really going to talk about, but that is the solution to some of the problems that I will talk about, my version of the solution. And then finally, after starting the company, I became respectable. An upstanding member of society with only one problem. In my games, that's my avatar. All right? And it actually represents something. I graduated in 1997, and I had a flat top in 1997, which, as you know, was not good. Absolutely not good. In fact, the second I got rid of it, my dating life improved dramatically. But the tongue is actually a tribute to Michael Jordan, because I was like, he always has the tongue out when he dunks. So that was the tongue. And my game name is The Man, but only so that when the kids play me and beat me, they can say they beat the man. But if I beat them, I say, the man beat you down, try harder. All right. So this is a little bit of the background, a little bit of the history. But I think seriously about serious problems. And one of the biggest things that perplex me, is what is happening with the educational system in the United States. In particular, sort of my adopted country. And I think a lot about that. And when I tend to think about problems, I think about them in a resource-constrained, sort of way. So I actually asked the question, what is the one big problem that if I could solve, I think would actually have the greatest impact on solving the issues or the challenges that we have, particularly in the K-12 sector? And I've bounced it around and thought about it a number of different ways, and I keep coming back to one answer, and that is engagement. It's not your typical, answer, but I'll get into why I believe that's the case. At the end of the day, we all know that our kids these days, they grow up, they're on instant messenger, social media, video games, etc. from day one. Yet when you go into the classroom, you see very little, if not none of that, right? We have a huge problem in education here in the United States, 21 out of 30 in some comparisons in science, 25 out of 30 in mathematics, 30% high school dropout rate. So you start looking at all of these sorts of things, you say, well, what's going on? And I came to the conclusion that was engagement when I looked at 2 more statistics. First statistic, 90% of instruction still relies on textbooks. Kids don't like textbooks. They don't use them, they don't open them. They're very outmoded. 61% of US students find school boring. This was an OECD study. Didn't think too much about that because I was like, well, of course, I think I found parts of school boring, except that I told you I'm a nerd, right? So I actually compared that to the TIMSS study of math and science. And what I found was that there's almost perfect inverse correlation. The countries with the highest boredom factor had the lowest achievement in math and science. The US had the second highest boredom factor. Okay? And achievement was down at the bottom again for the countries that were studied. So I said, all right, well, we have a solution to that. I know video games and all the rest of that. And what is it about video games that are really interesting? Well, if you take a child and you put them on a video game, what happens? They get on, they play for 5 minutes, they fail. They'll start again, play for 10 minutes, they'll fail. 20 minutes, an hour, 2 years. They will do that 100 times, failing every time, having to learn something every time before they finally succeed. Completely self-motivated, going out, asking their friends, going out and finding cheat codes, buying books to help them get through it, right? Does this happen in the school system? Not at all. What's the first thing that happens when you have a problem in the school system? You raise your hand and say, teacher, can you help me? That's the first thing that happens. So the question was, why couldn't we take the motivation, engagement, et cetera, that happens inside video games and actually apply it to education, apply it to chemistry, apply it to algebra, apply it to whatever? And the answer is that ultimately you can. But that's actually, the solution is not actually what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is sort of the ideas that sit behind the solution. And one of those ideas, there are actually 3 of them, and I'm going to try to construct how I came to the idea that educational video games can actually be a very powerful medium. One of the ideas is the idea of how much culture influences education. The second is the idea of how much engagement and relevance obviously influence it. And the last is the notion of an innovation mindset. I think Tony said it best yesterday when he said that one of the things that we lack is not that we lack resources, we lack resourcefulness. Okay? And so I want to bring those 3 things together and explain how this solution actually works. So first thing is culture. I'm going to explain a story. I told you my mother is from the Bahamas, my father's from Nigeria. How they met, that's a different story. But in any case, I grew up in Nigeria until I came to boarding school in the States. And as I was growing up, I went to the American International School. And so I was very exposed to a lot of Americans. I was very exposed to everyone from everywhere all over the place. And I remember one of my first experiences with an American household, which was fascinating for me, because I didn't know if this was all American households. I know it wasn't mine. But the kid, he was there. I won't mention any names. But he got really mad with his mom. He said, "Come on, Mom, crap." And I was like, you could actually, you can sort of curse in front of your mom. I was like, I love America. I'm going there, this is great, So I look at that, and it's a funny story, but I actually draw a broader sort of cultural thing. There are a lot of personal freedoms that I absolutely love, that we take for granted here in the United States, that I think are absolutely phenomenal, but we need to understand that what comes with that is also the freedom to not take your education seriously, for example. And kids, if they're not guided in the right way, will actually end up, doing that. And so if you look at the comparison to other countries or to other places, the pressure on achieving, an education is different for different reasons. In Japan, you want to be the same as everybody else. If everybody's studying, then, you want to be doing what they're doing. In Korea, you have school and you have after school. And sometimes you don't get home until 7, 8 o'clock at night. I think that would be called child slavery here, or something like that, child abuse. In India, the population is so huge, and the poverty level is just so dramatic that if you're offered the opportunity to actually change your life by getting into one of those coveted spots in one of the better universities or whatever, then you're taking it and you're studying your entire time to get there. And the one thing that I found in the US is that we haven't found that unique thing that gets our kids to want to be engaged in the process. So the culture aspect is very important. You have to think about that. The engagement and relevance. I'll give you 2 examples or 2 stories. One story that is actually the way to do it, and then the second story that is not the way to do it. When I was growing up, again, I was in Nigeria, American International School, and my science teacher, this is how I got into science. My science teacher created a game called Quiz Kids. Okay? He basically built this board, and it had like light bulbs. And he had two sides of the room. And he would split the room into two, and we'd go up and we'd sit down on teams, and he would ask a science question. This is just drill and kill, right? He would ask a science question. He had a buzzer in front of you, hit the buzzer, and the first person to get the buzzer, would actually answer the questions, like Family Feud, everyone would go up and down and all the rest of that. And I've got to tell you that actually turned me on to science. He was also the same teacher who turned me on to computers by saying, go build a video game. My video game, do you guys remember Zork, like the old Infocom adventures, all text and all that? There you go. That was the type of video game that I initially built. Of course, it was about the death of all the teachers in my school, but that's a different story. That's a different story. But it actually worked, and it was fun, and it was really interesting. And so they tricked me to some extent, or they got me engaged in the process of education by creating something that I actually love to do. Fast forward a few years. I graduate from Cornell University, degree in electrical engineering. I'm doing my couple of years before going back to business school, and I wanted to give back. So I go and I sign up for Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I had a little brother he was going into 9th grade. His name was Darian. His mom wanted me to teach him algebra. And I was like, okay, this is doable. I went all the way through calculus, right? So I go and I start to sit down with Darian, and I find out that bright kid, but if you sit down and you ask him what 10 times 4 was, it would take him 10 seconds to get the wrong answer. And so you're sitting there and you're saying, this is a real challenge. I have to catch you up on like 3rd through 8th grade, before we actually start to talk about x plus y equals 5. And so I was perplexed and really sort of frustrated. And so I said, well, I know how to do this. I mean, this is like my linear equation, probably just you hit it, and you hit it hard until you actually get it. So I tried to do that with Darren. Forgetting all the things that I had learned in the past, I put him on like a hardcore intervention diet of like 3rd through 8th grade arithmetic, and tried to throw in the algebra and all the rest of that into there. And again, let me say, very bright kid. If you told him something he was interested in, he'd pick it up in a heartbeat. So we're doing this month 1, month 2. At the end of month 2, he basically goes to his mom, and he asks her to ask me to stop. It's like I was doing medieval torture, or something. And I was traumatized. I was a little traumatized by it. I went to him, and I asked him, why? We're just starting to make progress. You're just starting to get there. He's like, I really like you, but we never have any fun. And I saw this as sort of an indication of sort of the generation as a whole. The fact that these kids do so many things on the outside and have the option and the freedom to do all of these things, but we don't present information that they critically need to know in a way or format that they're used to absorbing, information. Just a good end to that story, he actually pinged me on Facebook about 2 months ago. He's like, you remember me? I'm like, hell yeah, I remember you. Check out this company. It's all because of you. He was pretty psyched about that. It's still waiting to get him up, to see the company offices, but it will happen. So that's the relevant and engagement aspect. The last part, and then I'll draw all of this together and give the solution. But the last part of it was an innovation or a lack of an innovation mindset that we have, here in this country. And what I mean by that is, I remember I was at a conference. I won't mention which conference it was. I was at a conference, and I was sitting in the audience, and on the stage were some real bigwigs in education. I mean, names that if I said them, you guys would know, right? So bigwigs in education. And we're sitting there, and we're listening. And as what sometimes happens when you have a panel of people, at the front of the stage or whatever, the moderator was basically allowing them to talk to themselves, and we were not, and sometimes I feel like that's what we do in education. We just talk amongst each other, and we don't really talk outside. But anyway, talking amongst themselves, and at the end of it, the person who was moderating the whole thing was about to shut down the session without letting any questions be asked from the audience. And I had my hand up for like 7 minutes, because I got tired of it, like 7 minutes before the end, and I was just like, come on, we need to ask some questions here. So I had my hand up, and it's amazing how people can ignore you, and it's like you're looking across from, boop, like skip right over and keep looking across. So, I had my hand up, And they finally said, okay, we're going to shut it down. I stood up and I said, no. You can't do that. There's no way that you have these people in education, all the rest, that you have a room full of 600 people. By the way, this conference was for young entrepreneurs. So you'd find in this audience like the next Zuckerberg or the next Reid Hoffman or whatever it happens to be. And everyone's always talking about in education we want innovation. So I'm like, this is the perfect audience. So I stand up, they say, okay, this guy, the panel said, this guy's had his hand up for a while, let him speak. So I get up and I ask the panel, listen, each of you has expertise in education in one or more different areas. You're real specialists. If there was one innovation, just one innovation that you wanted to have or you wanted to see in education, what would it be? I'm waiting for the drum roll, like, hit that one, And they sort of look at each other, and there's like pure silence and all the rest of this sort of thing. And finally, one of them says, well, I think we sort of alluded to it throughout the whole course of the discussion, better teachers. And I was, the audience sort of groaned. I was in shock, because a teacher had a huge influence on me, but I don't know if that's an innovation. Like better teachers is better training and all the rest. Oh, by the way, if I go back to some of the other things just really quickly that other people say, are the solutions, let's say charter schools. Charter schools are great. I haven't figured out how to scale them. There's some really great charter schools and there's some really terrible ones, right? The other solution is smaller class size. Okay, I think smaller class size is great, but a smaller class with a bad teacher is still a bad class, right? We talk about better teachers. I'm like, better teachers are absolutely great. Do you know we have about 4 million teachers, give or take, for the 53 million kids in K-12 in the United States? What percentage of those teachers are actually good? I'm sorry, let me say good. Great enough to actually take a student who is disinterested in learning and get them to want to learn. That's probably a relatively small percentage. It doesn't scale again. So I'm sitting there, and they said better teachers, and I got frustrated, and I was supposed to talk. I talked about the 25 next big things, there. And I mentioned that, and I said, the frustrating thing to me about that is we've had the iPod, we've had the iPad, we've had Google, we've had all these things. You could say you want a better way of teaching 1,000 teachers at once. You could say that you want some innovation that allows you to scale out across people or across students, but technology did not seem to be on the radar screen at all. And so it was a really frustrating sort of moment for me, despite agreeing with the underlying message. So let me take those three things and sort of say, let me postulate a solution. And it's a solution that we're actually working on, so I have a vested interest in it, obviously. But the idea is that if you have something where you need something that's scalable, or a problem where you need something that's scalable, and you need to sit at the center of those three circles, so right in the center of that Venn diagram, then imagine a world, if tomorrow we said that the entire world, given the stats around video games, right? Do you guys know the stats around video games? Let me hit you with something. In the next 10 years, there'll be 1 billion virtual world users. Okay? By the time the average child in the United States is 21 years old, I guess they're not a child anymore, but the average youth is 21 years old, they'll have played 10,000 hours of video games. If you put that into 8-hour workdays, that's 3.5 years of video game playing. That's more than their first job out of college. The average age of a game player is 33 years old. So now all of your teachers who are coming out are part of this generation. Also means it scales up to college. 43% of game players are women. Okay, most people think it's a teenage boy thing. So given all of that, imagine a situation or a solution where tomorrow we said every student wakes up and they're part of a video game. It's an educational video game. And when they wake up, here's how the system would work. When you wake up, you're automatically a part of a team, right? So you can't hide. You have to help the members of your team in order for the team to actually win. So that team could be a school, or it could be a team of your own choosing. Find your friends. Same thing we do in social networking, right? So find your friends in this system. You're going to choose the curriculum that you can go to, and the curriculum automatically adapts. So it goes to your lowest point, your point of incompetency, and brings you up. So it builds your confidence level, right? So it's that adaptive software thing. As you move around the environment, you're competing, and you're collaborating with everyone, and you get points, you get rewards, right? So you get the question right, you get points for it. You get it wrong, no points are taken away. But it starts to build your confidence. One of the biggest challenges I think we have in the system that we have for education right now is there's no emotional feel. right? Like, you don't really care until you get a test back. If you did well, you're like, yeah. If you did badly, you're like, oh, I suck. And that's the only time you get an emotional response. At least in video games, then you have it happen more and more and more often. So it's constant, and your frustration doesn't become too big, and your joy, starts to build up. The last thing that I want to add to this system, though, is I want to put in a system where kids have to help each other. We have a 300,000 teacher jobs that are going to be lost this year. Normally, we have what they call the sage on the stage, 1 teacher, 30 students. Well, I've never understood why you wouldn't utilize the knowledge of the other kids in the classroom, because they do have knowledge. So what if you actually created a system where they got points for helping each other? Right? So let them help each other. They get points. They want to help each other because they're on the same team. And as a result of that, maybe you go from 1 teacher in the classroom to like 7 or 8 or 9 teachers. So we're going to take this entire system. We're going to allow the friends to connect to each other, the kids to connect to each other in these educational environments, educational gaming environments that they actually choose to be in. We're going to give it to them free of charge. So they can go and do it at home, et cetera, and we'll figure out how to make money a different way. I don't say that glibly. It's something my VCs are on my back about a lot. But that's what we're going to do. And if we were to do that, guess what would start to happen? We'd start to have a movement. Except that the movement would be completely driven by students. And the educators, because in many cases, educators are above the age of 33. They're not comfortable with the idea of educational video games or anything like that, but they do care about the kids. And when they start to see kids move in this way, they will wonder what's going on. And this has happened. This happened in Chicago Public Schools. Someone said, why aren't we using this? And all of a sudden, Chicago Public Schools got on board. Okay, so what we're trying to do is create a student movement around the idea of what education should be, should look like, and should feel like in the language that students want to hear and want to see. And if you think this is a pipe dream, then watch what's happening. Come this fall, we're actually launching a $50,000 scholarship for whoever wins the educational game. We've been in schools and all the rest of that. But beware, the inmates are about to take over the asylum. Thank you.